Well, I am so excited to share my message with you today. Our talk title is God is Always Ready. And I am so excited to share this with you today because this took me to some new territory that I hadn't really explored before. And isn't that just so perfect? Because new territory is where we all are right now, right? This is where we are all finding ourselves in the midst of this pandemic. And so, my questions for you to ponder this morning are these. What's guiding you through these tumultuous times? What guides you when you're going where no man or woman has ever been before in new territory? And what guides you when you need to be a little more flexible, right? When you need to be, right? And so I want to start by sharing a story with you about a foggy night at sea when the man that was positioned as the lookout on the lookout post suddenly yells out, "Captain, ship approaching on the starboard side." And so the captain orders the following message to be sent. Adjust your course 20 degrees east. And the message that returns says, no, adjust your course 20 degrees. Well, this does not sit well with this captain. So he sends back a message that says, this is Admiral John Jones of the U.S. Navy, and I order you to adjust your course 20 degrees east. And the response is, this is Private Ed Smith. Adjust your course 20 degrees. So the captain is absolutely enraged at this point, and so he fires back, I command you to adjust your course. This is a warship. And to which the Private Smith, responds, yes, sir, but you still must be the one to adjust your course. This is a lighthouse. And so, there are many kinds of lighthouses and beacons of guiding lights in our lives, aren't there? But are we willing to recognize them, especially when they're right in front of us? I love what Anne Lamott says about these amazing tall buildings that protect ships from crashing on shore. She says, lighthouses don't go running all over an island trying to save boats. They stand there shining. That's all they have to do. They just stand there shining. And so it is with us. We are the light of the world, and we are meant to shine. And so last Thursday, in a historic homegoing, three former presidents, came together at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in my hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, to bid farewell to a beautiful, bright light whose life will continue to shine as an inspiration for us all to get into some good trouble, as he liked to say. And of course, I am referring to the life well lived by legendary civil rights leader, Congressman John Lewis. And even though all of the eulogies that day were very moving in the right and perfect ways, it was something that President Obama said that has actually stuck with me over these last several days. He said, John Lewis was an American whose faith was tested again and again to produce a man of pure joy and unbreakable perseverance. Let me say that again. John Lewis was an American whose faith was tested again and again to produce a man of pure joy and unbreakable perseverance. And so I invite you to just let that last part sink in. The part about pure joy and unbreakable perseverance. Now, I don't know about you, but hearing this statement stirred me to my soul. And it stirred me to my soul because these are words of truth. I mean, yes, they're beautiful, eloquent words about his extraordinary life, but they are words of truth. Why? Because John Lewis's life was tested again and again. As the son of a sharecropper, as he stood on the front lines to end Jim Crow laws, as he was beaten in Selma, Alabama, all of which, of course, led to major and significant changes in our country, like the passage of the Voting Rights Act. Now, I could go on and on, but the point is this. Despite his many challenges and setbacks, he became a man of pure joy and unbreakable perseverance. This is why John Lewis was known as the conscience of Congress. And so this is where things got really interesting for me this week. Because all of these ideas about what guides you through tumultuous times and what it means to be tested again and again, and how an individual can become and develop and cultivate unbreakable perseverance. All of this got me thinking about Job. Now, to be honest, this was the new territory because I have not spent a lot of time with Job over my lifetime. And for one thing, explaining Job is not an easy job. And another thing, it is just chock full of all kinds of Old Testament style pain and suffering, which is a bit much for me. However, my dear ones, people are suffering right now in our nation and around the world. You know, this morning, the news continues to report astonishing numbers of death in the United States. It's well over 150,000 due to COVID. And there's an astounding number of COVID cases that are continuing to increase. The economy is struggling, and we still have major protests happening in the streets of America to shine a light on the very things that John Lewis stood for. And yet, here we are. And like Job, we are experiencing change, as you've heard me say over these months, in the blink of an eye. And like Job, it appears that things have changed for the worse. And like Job, we do have the capacity to practice faith over fear. Now, I say all of this even though the premise of Job's story is one of the most difficult to understand because it offers no spiritual substance about the cause of his problems. For instance, the story begins with an anthropomorphic God holding court with a character named Satan, who then bets God that Job, who is a blameless and upright man, will indeed curse God if he'll just make Job's life miserable. And to be clear, by miserable, I mean the most horrible things happen to this man. And so, while this is high drama storytelling, it's much more of a throwback to the origins of Zoroastrianism, which is one of the world's oldest religions, where there are two opposing forces, one good, one evil, kind of like in Star Wars. And these forces struggle over control of the universe. In other words, it feels a bit mythological in that way. But we know that God doesn't hold court. God doesn't make bets. God doesn't place bets. And God certainly doesn't inflict pain and suffering like some kind of puppeteer that has a doll on a string. And this is the problem with the story of Job, at least from the unity perspective, because it seems that Job's hellish nightmare of losing nearly everything, including his 10 children, is somehow the result of a whimsical game of chance, as if he's some kind of plaything that's being debated between two characters. Now, having said all of that, I also want to share with you the wonderful things about the book of Job. Because this story, and it is a beautiful study in integrity, credibility, and certainly patience. Why? Because it's not really so much about why these things happened, why these trials and tribulations came upon Job. It's not so much about that. It's really about how he dealt with it. Do you hear the difference? It's not so much about the why, it's about the how. Now, as you hear me say often, every trial and every tribulation is a testimony in the making. Every trial and every tribulation is a testimony in the making, and Job is such a beautiful example of this. Can I get an amen? Why don't we just say that together? Every trial and every tribulation is a testimony in the making, and that is you. Boo. That's you. And again, just like Job, we have the capacity to come to terms with what it means to deal with these trials and tribulations by practicing faith over fear. You know, it's interesting that one of our most cherished unity spiritual principles is that we create our lives by the activity of our own thinking, which is of course why we love saying things like thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. And so on the surface it might look like this contradicts Job's story, but in chapter 3 Job gives us a clue. And it's a big clue. He says, truly, the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. Truly, the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. And so, in many ways, this is one of the most powerful powerful verses in the entire Bible because it points to the spiritual truth that we do indeed create our life experiences by the thoughts that we think and the decisions that we make. It is just as our master teacher and our way shower Jesus said, according to your faith, let it be done unto you. And so the answer to fear is to focus on your faith. Now, I'm not talking about blind faith here, right? I'm not talking about magical thinking. I'm talking about spiritual faith based in spiritual principle. In other words, if you focus on what frightens you, and I get it, we are living in tumultuous times, but if you focus on what frightens you most, then you are expressing faith in the very things that will come to fruition. Do you get that? It's like rehearsing it. Eventually, Job learned this too, because throughout it all, throughout his entire experience, it was his faith in God that sustained him. This is what allowed him to live to tell the story. You know, it has been said, don't fear the future, God is already there. And this is so true. You know, not only is God already there, but God is already here, like right now in this moment. God is everywhere. God is the presence that is never an absence. And just as the Apostle Paul said, we live and move and have our very being in God. Now, I know what you're probably thinking about this time. Well, if God is everywhere, then why are these crazy, cockamamie, COVID bad things happening? You know, why are things getting worse? And why are we continuing to be tested? And these are excellent questions. God is equally present, yes. But God is not equally expressed. God is equally present in potential, but it is up to us as to how we express the living energy of the living God. You see, we humans have that little thing called free will. Now, I know we don't like to be reminded of this. I know that it's an inconvenient truth. But free will allows us to choose what we do each step of the way. And it allows us to choose how, so there's that word again, how we express our divinity. And so you represent God. You determine how you show up. You decide what sacred qualities you express and how you show up in your life. These sacred qualities like love and generosity of spirit and compassion and kindness. And so what does this look like right now in our current culture? Well, one very simple example might look like this. Love your neighbor. Wear a mask. Yeah. Love your neighbor and wear a mask. And so you continue to ponder these questions that I've posed to you today about these unique times. And especially if you are feeling like you are being tested over and over and over again. I want you to know that as you continue to ponder these questions, my prayer for you this morning is that you will think of Job and you will think of John Lewis and how they navigated it, how they dealt with it. Because there's some beautiful blueprints there. And so I want to leave you with this. These are the final words of John Lewis in a piece that he wrote shortly before his death. And he asked the New York Times to publish on the day of his funeral, which they did. And so this comes from the last paragraph, and these are his last words. So I invite you to come close and to listen and to take these in. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. And so ends our message for today. Thank you, and God bless you.